whistle! Blow the whistle now!
He's got him! Keto's got Alexis under!
Call emergency! Call it now!
Code red at the Orca tank. Repeat, code red. Trainer down.
He's not coming up, dear God! He's not coming up!
Welcome to True Animal Terrors, where real danger meets real stories. Don't look away. At 29 years old, Alexis Martínez was a man standing at the very height of his life, full of energy, ambition, and an unshakable love for animals. To the world, he appeared simply as a marine mammal trainer, one of the black-suited figures who dazzled audiences with carefully choreographed routines. But to those who knew him best, Alexis was far more than that role. He was compassionate, intensely driven, and profoundly respected by his peers. His adult life had been shaped entirely by his devotion to understanding the creatures he worked with every single day, a devotion that demanded both courage and patience. He had built his career at Lurk, a marine zoo perched on Tenerife in Spain's Canary Islands, a region celebrated for its golden beaches, eternal springtime climate, and ocean attractions that drew millions of tourists each year. Yet Lurk was no ordinary facility. It was one of Europe's most high-profile marine parks, a shining centerpiece of entertainment that combined exotic wildlife dolphin acrobatics, and most famously a pod of killer whales transferred in partnership with SeaWorld in the United States. Alexis had spent years at the park steadily proving himself until he was recognized as one of its most skilled trainers. His selection to work directly with the orcas was no small honor. It required extraordinary physical strength, relentless discipline, and above all, the absolute trust that had to flow between human and animal. The orcas of Lurk were not plucked from the surrounding Canary waters. They were bred and trained in captivity. Part of SeaWorld's global expansion strategy, the whales carried names etched into training logs: Tekoa, a restless young male; Kohana, sleek and spirited; Skyla, youthful and energetic; and Keto, the most dominant presence in the pool. Keto in particular drew attention. He was a 14-year-old male born on June 17, 1995, at SeaWorld Orlando. His bloodline was storied yet tragic. He was the son of Kotar, a wild-caught bull who had once been taken from his natural pod but died in captivity, and Kalina, the very first orca successfully born and raised within the artificial confines of a marine park. Unlike his ancestors, Keto had never swum free in the ocean. He had never chased fish across icy currents, never traveled thousands of miles along migratory routes, never known the vastness of the sea. Every moment of his life had unfolded within tanks under the strict choreography of trainers. By the time Keto was shipped across the Atlantic in 2006, under the breeding and loan agreement between SeaWorld and Lurk, his personality had already begun to shift. Trainers noted how physically commanding he was, long, muscular, and powerful, but also how emotionally distant he seemed. He was unpredictable. There were days when he flatly ignored hand signals surfacing when he wasn't asked, releasing forceful exhalations as though in irritation. There were rehearsals where he deviated from routine, leaving fellow trainers uneasy. Internal reports documented these issues, carefully warning that Keto sometimes displayed a lack of controllability and signs of mild aggression. Yet despite the flag behaviors, he was still placed in regular waterwork sessions and performances. In the months leading up to the incident, the warnings grew sharper. Just weeks before, trainers had observed Keto becoming less reliable, responding sluggishly or not at all to cues. He acted more independently, straying from the carefully designed routines. Some described him as moody or temperamental, but always manageable. After all, Keto had never seriously injured anyone before. He had never attacked a trainer, and so assumptions hardened into policy. He was considered safe enough for close contact work. But assumptions in captivity can be deadly. Behind the polished shows and applause, reality was harsher. Orcas in captivity, deprived of the boundless sea and their natural social networks, often developed stress behaviors that few outside the marine world ever saw. Trainers understood that confined predators sometimes acted out in ways no one fully anticipated or understood. Alexis, however, never shied away from the challenge. He believed in the animals. He believed in the bond he shared with them. And so on the morning of December 24, 2009, he arrived at Lurk, just as he always did, calm, prepared, and ready for rehearsal with Keto. What neither he nor his colleagues realized was that this ordinary holiday morning would end in tragedy. The warning signs had been there for months, written into confidential evaluations shared between SeaWorld and Laurel Parquet. But in an industry built on entertainment schedules and global image, those warnings had been rationalized, absorbed, and ultimately ignored. Keto's record inside the pool was more complicated than glossy brochures or smiling trainers ever revealed. He was described as having persistent issues with social integration, often displaying dominant or isolating behaviors that set him apart from the other orcas. At times, he postured aggressively, asserting himself as though the tank were his alone. He also struggled with consistency during sessions, sometimes ignoring hand signals entirely, sometimes showing bursts of energy, followed by long, inexplicable stretches of reluctance. Trainers documented how he could become unmotivated without warning, disengaging in the middle of rehearsals, his towering body drifting in silence just beneath the surface. These were not minor quirks. When the animal in question weighs over 3 tons and has the raw, explosive strength to crush a human body in a single lunge, inconsistency is not a personality trait, it is a red flag. Yet despite the warnings, Keto was still cleared for what the industry calls water work. That term, spoken casually within the park, meant trainers entered the water with the orca swimming alongside him, performing synchronized dives, flips, and gestures in front of crowds. It depended entirely on trust on the animal's willingness to cooperate in that moment. There was no real safety net, no cage between trainer and predator, no wall to shield a mistake. Just a man in a wetsuit floating inches away from a creature evolved to dominate the oceans. If Keto decided to act out, there was nothing that could stop him. This wasn't a one-off oversight unique to Laurel Parquet. Across the marine park industry, such risks had quietly become routine. Instances of unresponsiveness, refusals, or flashes of aggression were often chalked up to moodiness, stress, even seasonal changes, explanations that made the danger seem ordinary. Trainers, many of them young and filled with passion, were encouraged to push through, to adapt, to lean on the supposed bond they had built. Trust the animal. Trust the training was the unspoken mantra. Alexis Martínez lived by that creed. He knew Keto could be difficult, knew his moods shifted, but he believed in their relationship. He believed in his own discipline and routine, convinced that respect was enough to bridge the chasm between man and predator. But belief has limits, and belief alone cannot stop 6,600 pounds of muscle, teeth, and instinct once it decides to turn deadly. The contradictions at the heart of captivity became stark when set against what we know of killer whales in the wild. Scientists remind us that orcas are not mindless predators, but astonishingly intelligent beings. They have regional dialects of calls, unique hunting techniques passed from generation to generation, and even particular tastes in food. Some pods specialize in salmon, others prefer herring, still others hunt seals. And through all this variety, one fact stands out: they do not hunt us. Despite the poisons we pump into their seas, the seismic blasts of sonar and ship noise that disorient them, and the cruel history of tearing calves away from mothers to stock aquariums, wild orcas have never turned on us. If any animal had cause for vengeance, it would be them. Yet they don't seek it. Instead, in many corners of the world, there are stories of orcas approaching boats, nudging kayaks gently, or playing games with divers, almost as if drawn to our species by curiosity and a strange sense of friendship. Trainers often admit that very little training goes into working with these animals. The whales seem to intuit what we want, eager to connect, to cooperate, as if relationships themselves are the reward. It is why the tragedy of captive attacks feels so jarring. The only documented instances of orcas killing people have occurred not in the wild, but inside marine parks. Some experts argue these deadly encounters are not truly malicious, that they are rough play spiraling out of control in tanks too small to dissipate energy. But others, like Howard Garrett of the Orca Network, see something deeper. He believes these acts are deliberate, though not cold-blooded. Orcas in captivity are cut off from their families, confined in barren pools, fed thawed fish instead of chasing live prey. Pressure builds, boredom festers, instincts twist inside concrete walls until inevitably it erupts. Still, when viewed across their 11 million years on Earth, killer whales seem to follow a universal rule in the wild: do not harm humans. Compared to their vast lineage, we are newcomers, fragile and slow, yet somehow tolerated. Perhaps it is biology, perhaps culture and ancient recognition written into their survival that coexistence with us is preferable. Whatever the reason, it is a grace we have not always earned. And so when Alexis Martinez placed his trust in Keto, he was stepping into a relationship, both profound and perilous one, that mirrored the uneasy balance between our species and theirs. In the vast ocean, orcas have chosen coexistence. In captivity, that choice is stolen from them. And when it is, the consequences can be catastrophic. December 24th, 2009 dawned over Tenerife with the kind of holiday rhythm that filled markets, streets, and beaches with anticipation. Families were preparing Christmas feasts, children tugged on parents' arms, and shops bustled with tourists buying last-minute gifts. But for 29-year-old Alexis Martinez, the morning began not with family rituals, but with the same unwavering dedication that had shaped his life, a commitment to the animals he considered his extended family. At 10:30 that morning, Alexis slipped into the Orca pool at Loro Parque for a closed rehearsal. There was no cheering audience, no flashing cameras, just a small team of trainers refining routines for the park's holiday performances. On paper, it was meant to be routine, predictable, and controlled. Keto, the 14-year-old male orca Alexis knew well, had been assigned to the session. Despite documented concerns about Keto's past behavior, the rehearsal went forward as planned. This was waterwork, direct, close contact interaction between man and predator, where trust hand signals and vocal cues replaced barriers or safety nets. At first, everything appeared normal. Alexis issued the familiar commands. Keto responded in kind. But experience and routine could not shield what happened next. Without warning, Keto pivoted, his 6,600-pound body surging forward. With brutal speed, he rammed Alexis squarely in the chest, with his rostrum the rigid bone of his skull. The impact's shattered ribs cracked his sternum and drove the air from his lungs. Before anyone on the poolside could react, Keto clamped his jaws around Alexis's torso and dragged him beneath the water. Trainers watching instantly knew this was no rehearsal gone slightly wrong. Whistles shrieked, radios crackled with emergency calls, and desperate shouts filled the air. Some trainers tossed fish into the water, others slapped the surface, trying anything to divert Keto's focus. But the orca would not release. He held Alexis down, surfacing only to gulp air before plunging beneath again, each movement a terrifying display of control and dominance. When Keto finally let go, the horror was already irreversible. Alexis's chest had been crushed, his lungs collapsed, his liver ruptured, and his abdomen riddled with catastrophic internal bleeding. Fellow trainers dove in, pulling his limp body onto the stage platform. CPR began immediately, compressions, breaths, frantic cries for help echoing across the empty stadium. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but the damage was too extensive. Alexis was pronounced dead at the scene. A rehearsal meant to prepare for holiday joy had dissolved into grief, confusion, and disbelief. In the hours that followed, questions reverberated through the park and beyond. Authorities ordered an autopsy, and when the Canary Islands report was released, its findings cut through the haze of denial. This was not an accident. The documented injuries read like the aftermath of a high-speed car crash. Multiple ribs snapped completely in half, a fractured sternum, vertebrae damage, and a liver torn apart by sheer blunt force. Hemorrhaging filled his abdomen, both lungs had collapsed, and water was found in his airways, evidence that after Keto's initial impact, Alexis had been dragged under long enough to inhale seawater. Even with his experience, there had been no chance of survival. But the autopsy went further. Canary Islands labor authorities declared Alexis's death a workplace accident, the direct result of exposure to an unsafe animal that had shown aggression before. This wasn't miscalculation, it was systemic negligence. Internal evaluations had already flagged Keto as difficult to control. So why had Alexis been in the water with him? Why was close contact allowed when warning signs had been ignored? Loro Parque's first public statements softened the truth, calling it a tragic accident. But behind closed doors, those who saw the report knew otherwise. This was not unpredictable animal behavior. It was the brutal, inevitable culmination of years of overlooked red flags, industry denial, and the dangerous illusion that trust and training could outweigh raw instinct and primal power. Alexis Martinez did not slip quietly beneath the surface. He did not drift into a peaceful drowning. He was crushed, drowned, killed by the very whale he had spent years loving and caring for, and the most haunting truth was that he would not be the last. In the immediate aftermath, however, the story told to the public was a sanitized fiction. Laurel Parquet's first statement painted the incident as a tragic accident, a drowning during a routine session perhaps caused by fainting or fatigue. To the casual observer, it sounded like the kind of misfortune that might strike in any high-risk profession, a sad but non-violent mishap. What the world was not told was that Alexis had been subjected to a sustained violent assault by a 3-ton predator with a documented record of troubling behavior. Behind closed doors, the park's leadership knew the truth almost immediately. Internal communications, later leaked by journalists and Orca advocacy groups, revealed staff and legal counsel discussing the devastating extent of Alexis's wounds and the urgent need to protect the park's image. Their fear was not only public backlash, but also the legal liability that could follow if the truth that an Orca had deliberately killed a trainer during rehearsal came to light. So the narrative was carefully crafted. Interviews were limited, details withheld, and although the autopsy was technically a public document in Spain, it was never pushed to the international press. Meanwhile, SeaWorld, Laurel Parquet's powerful American partner, and the lender of the whales stepped into the shadows of crisis management. According to documents uncovered years later, SeaWorld executives were actively involved in shaping the response. One internal memo from early 2010 carried chillingly precise instructions. We must be extremely cautious about how this incident is portrayed in the media. Avoid language that implies aggression or predatory behavior. Another line read, frame the event as a tragic but unpredictable occurrence. Emphasize the emotional bond between trainer and animal. It was corporate spin designed to shield not just Laurel Parquet, but SeaWorld itself from scrutiny. But the cracks in the story soon began to spread. The Canary Islands Labor Authority released its findings, and they were unequivocal. Alexis Martínez had died from massive trauma inflicted by Keto. This was not a slip, not a fainting spell, not an accident. His sternum was broken, his ribs shattered, his liver ruptured. The violence of the encounter was undeniable. Why then was the truth hidden? Because acknowledging it would have meant more than admitting to one death. It would have forced the public to confront the brutal reality of keeping orcas confined for human entertainment. It would have raised impossible questions. What does captivity do to intelligent predators? How much risk is acceptable for trainers asked to swim beside 6,000-pound animals with no barrier between them? And most damning of all, it would have revealed an industry built on denial, where warnings were ignored and lives were gambled in the name of spectacle. Despite the autopsy, despite the reports, no legal action was ever taken against Laurel Parquet or SeaWorld. The park did not face criminal charges. There was no sweeping investigation into training practices, safety protocols, or the ethics of close contact performances. Public statements expressed sorrow, but never accountability. Within weeks, Laurel Parquet resumed its orca shows. Trainers returned to the water. The message was as clear as it was. Chilling life at the park would go on as if nothing had happened. Outside the park walls, however, the tide was beginning to turn. Animal rights groups like PETA and the Whale and Dolphin Conservation Society seized on Alexis's death as a rallying cry. His tragedy was not an isolated event, they argued, but part of a pattern, evidence that captivity itself bred violence, that intelligent, wide-ranging predators stripped of the sea could not be expected to perform without consequence. They pointed to scientific data showing that captive orcas suffer physically and psychologically, collapsed dorsal fins, worn teeth from gnawing concrete, neurotic behaviors, and aggression absent in the wild. Alexis's death was no longer just a personal tragedy. It was a symbol of an industry unwilling to face its own truth. They were not accidents. They were not isolated tragedies. They were the direct consequence of an unnatural environment forced upon some of the most intelligent predators on Earth. Orcas, whose natural range spans thousands of miles across open oceans, were reduced to circling the same concrete tanks. Their instincts blunted, their social structures fractured. Activists made their message plain, and relentless orcas do not belong in tanks. If the marine park industry refused to change, they warned more deaths would follow. That warning crystallized in 2013 with the release of the documentary Blackfish. The film centered on Tilikum, the massive bull orca responsible for the death of trainer Dawn Brancheau at SeaWorld Orlando in 2010. But it also wove in the story of Alexis Martínez, whose death at Laurel Parquet less than 6 months earlier had been shrouded in corporate silence. Through harrowing footage and interviews, Blackfish revealed a world of exploitation where both trainers and orcas were placed in constant jeopardy for the sake of spectacle. Its impact was seismic. Public backlash against SeaWorld soared, attendance dropped, and stock prices plummeted. Celebrities, conservationists, and ordinary families spoke out with one voice: the age of captive orcas must end. For Alexis's family and colleagues, Blackfish was bittersweet. His death, once hidden behind euphemisms and press releases, now stood as one of the most tragic examples of the industry's failures. Yet it was also a wound reopened, a painful reminder that Alexis had not been protected, that warnings had been ignored, and that his life was sacrificed to an unsafe system. But the film did what silence could not. It cracked the carefully polished facade of marine entertainment. Trainers who had once remained loyal to the parks began to speak openly about the risks, about the close calls, about the culture of denial that permeated the industry. Alexis's death was not an outlier. It belonged to a disturbing pattern that had haunted the marine park world for decades. Dawn Brancheau's killing in 2010 by Tilikum made headlines around the globe, not only because she was one of SeaWorld's most respected trainers, but because Tilikum's violent history was already well known. He had been involved in two other deaths: Kelty Byrne, a young marine biology student pulled into the pool by orcas in 1991 in Canada, and a man who trespassed into his tank years later. In both cases, the raw, unpredictable power of captivity was revealed, and in both cases, the narrative was smoothed over as trainer error or freak accident. Kelty Byrne's death, like Alexis's, bore the same haunting notes: a routine moment, a sudden slip, a massive animal seizing the opportunity, and a human life ended in seconds. She never stood a chance against the combined weight and force of orcas acting outside any trainer's control. Yet despite these mounting deaths, the industry resisted sweeping reform. The refrain remained stubborn: these were isolated incidents. The procedures were sound, the trainers were at fault. But how many more names must be added to that list before the truth is accepted? How many ribs broken, lungs collapsed, or bodies dragged beneath the water before the real question is asked: should these animals be kept in captivity at all? The growing list of trainers killed or injured by captive orcas is not a string of coincidences. It is the predictable outcome of forcing wild instincts into concrete confinement. Each tragedy, Kelty's, Alexis's, Dawn's, points to the same conclusion: this is not safe, not for humans and not for the whales themselves. The industry's response to every tragedy has always been the same: minimize, deflect, and shift focus onto the individual animal or trainer rather than the system itself. Each death is treated as an anomaly, an unfortunate misstep rather than a symptom of a deeper, more dangerous truth. But as the years pass, as autopsy reports surface and documentaries expose hidden memos, the evidence has become impossible to ignore. The question hangs heavier with each passing case: how many more trainers must die before the industry admits that it is not safe, not for the humans who dedicate their lives to these animals, nor for the orcas themselves to exist in such an artificial and perilous environment? Alexis Martinez's death carved a wound that still echoes today. It left behind a legacy both tragic and illuminating, underscoring the contradictions and complexities of the animal entertainment industry. He was not just a trainer, he was a man whose passion for marine life radiated through everything he did, especially in his devotion to orcas. His colleagues described him as patient, respectful, someone who treated the whales not as tools of performance, but as beings he genuinely loved. Friends and family remember his boundless enthusiasm, his belief that humans and animals could coexist even within the confines of a marine park. He trusted in the system that employed him, trusted the protocols, the safety measures, the culture that reassured him that risk was managed. What he didn't see, what many didn't see, was that those assurances masked a reality where the dangers were downplayed, hidden in plain sight. The truth is that Alexis, like so many before him, paid the ultimate price for believing in an industry that placed spectacle above safety. His story forces us to confront questions many would rather avoid. How many more lives must be lost before the world stops and reconsiders the cost of this form of entertainment? How long can a billion-dollar industry built on confinement and denial continue to operate without reckoning with the blood on its hands? Yet even in heartbreak, his story carries weight beyond tragedy. Alexis's death has become a cautionary tale woven into a larger global conversation about the ethics of captivity. It has spurred reflection not only on the treatment of orcas, creatures whose intelligence and complexity rival our own, but also on what it says about us as humans when we confine what we claim to admire. His family and friends refusing to let his memory fade continue to speak out about the dangers he faced and the change they hope his death can inspire. They hold tightly to the belief that Alexis's life and sacrifice will not be in vain, that it might push the world one step closer to ending an industry where both whales and humans are casualties of profit. And so the questions remain as sharp today as on the morning he died. What price are we willing to pay for entertainment? How many more lives must be lost before we confront the truth? Alexis Martínez died doing what he loved beside the animals he devoted himself to. But the harder question, the one that reverberates through every pool and every performance, is this: should he have died at all? Was it ever worth the risk? And what does it say about us that an industry still profits from tragedies like his? Alexis Martínez devoted his life to the animals he loved, and his story reminds us of both the beauty and the danger of our bond with them. His legacy challenges us to ask, should creatures as powerful and intelligent as orcas ever live in tanks at all? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you believe there's a way for humans and these animals to truly coexist in captivity? Share your perspective in the comments below. And if this story moved you, please like this video, subscribe for more powerful stories, and share it with someone who should hear it. Together we can keep these conversations alive.